I'm going to take us to the text in a moment, but first I want to share my little exploration from this week. I was working on typesetting Millennia and Microcosm, and the fact that there's just the one chapter about the Greeks, despite the fact that he wrote it so well, really made me want to go looking for other Kenneth Smith essays that did overviews of the Greeks. So I was looking at another book in process that he's got going, Old World Principles, which is a collection of the various essays he wrote for the Dallas Philosophers Forum and other groups. And it had some overviews, including an article on Heraclitus. And I was reading the bibliography, and I noticed this book is referenced in it, Theology of the Early Greek Philosophers by Werner Jaeger. Now, Jaeger's famous for his series Paideia, 3 volumes, which is masterful. I've got them all. But this one, I had seen it in the notes before once or twice over the last several decades, but never followed up on. But so I did this week, and boy, his Jaeger's chapter on Heraclitus is so good. I think it's better than Philip Wheelwright's book. And he doesn't cover as much ground. It's not a whole book. It's just some of the fragments. But Jaeger really gets Heraclitus, and he creates a picture of what he thinks Heraclitus was up to. That's really insightful, and he really digs into some of the key terms that Heraclitus uses, like phronesis and synapsis. So anyone who's interested, it's available for free on the Internet Archive, and it's you can skip ahead to the first couple of pages of the Heraclitus chapter is transitional from the previous ones. He's typical, but once he gets going, it's I liked it so much I immediately read it a second time right after the first time, and then I started taking notes. So anyway, there it is for those who want to follow up. So this issue, going back to the text, let's go to paragraph 3 and the sentence that Stephen took us to, and part of the context for the medieval revolution is this idea that Aristotle, Plato, Heraclitus, plenty of writers tried to say that the premise of the ancient worldview should be enough to make people behave well. I mean, who wants to be sick? Why wouldn't you want to be healthy? Why wouldn't you want your world to be healthy so that it can support you more? It all makes sense. And this idea of using that as a lever to try to get people to think about, how does nature operate? What about your nature, your inner nature? How does that operate? Try to get people interested in figuring out who they are and why they become the way they do, why they see the world the way they do. It all seemed like it ought to hold together, and yet we see the Peloponnesian War, we see not just that one, but all the wars that follow, the civil wars between Sparta and Thebes and Corinth, all the breakup, the conquest by Macedonia, but then the fracturing of the resulting Hellenistic Empire. We see, with Rome, all of these things are basically counterexamples that seem to argue nature doesn't seem to be enough of a hold on our minds. If it were enough, our history would have gone differently. And so the premise of the ancient worldview is got this Achilles heel. Well, it's fitting that it should be Achilles. It's got this Achilles heel, which is that when everything's firing on all cylinders, you get masterful works of art and architecture and history and philosophy, but it's so easy for it not to be firing on all cylinders. Like the Greeks just couldn't resist a civil war. It's like, I mean, we could all work together, but how about we fight? It's like it was so hard for them to resist. And so you can see the motivation, especially when you're not talking about the Greeks, but you're talking about late Roman Empire with massive corruption. You can see the motivation to say we need a stronger leash on the human mind and human behavior than the ancient premise is offering us. Nature doesn't seem to be enough. Nature does get the final word, but by the time it gets its final word in, it often takes the place of, famine, disaster, catastrophe, genocide, horrible collapses are the way that nature corrects our misunderstandings and our bad behavior. And so the motivation to say there needs to be a God who is above nature, more authoritative than nature is, and therefore a stronger leash on human behavior with a better chance of helping us behave like decent human beings, right? Which is a powerful motivation in the late Roman Empire. People are looking for a way to how do we not keep just endlessly being stuck in this, self-replicating disaster that is late Rome? So it was one of the things that occurred to me that I hadn't talked about when we were doing chapter 5. It's like, why is the medieval God a transcendental God and not a natural God? Why is it a break with all gods that have ever dominated throughout the ancient period? Why are we now talking about a transcendent God who's greater than nature? And yeah, I always explained it as it's helpful in the debates, right? To say, well, your God is only the God of the ocean. My God is the God of everything. So my God beats your God. I mean, it was helpful in debates, but that's not actually the core motivation. The core motivation is, how do we stop replicating the disaster that is, the ancient Roman Empire? How do we stop doing this? If nature was enough of a tether, we wouldn't have the problem that we have. They're saying to themselves in the 300s and 400s and 500s. So we need a better source of authority. We need to refound our entire way of thinking about, where does meaning come from? Where does value come from? How do we make difficult choices? Who should rule? What should normal people do most of the time? All of these questions we need to, you can see why they'd say the foundations were all built on this assumption that nature was enough of a tether. And now we see that it's just too, now 300s, 400s. Now we see that it's as a tether, it's deeply flawed. It doesn't it doesn't intercede to alter our behavior except in the form of catastrophes, and that's too painful a way to learn our lessons. So we need a new authority that will be the foundation for all of the aspects of our culture. And thus is born the premise of the medieval epoch within the late stage Roman Empire, growing up within it, saying, okay, we have a perfect God. He's always good. He knows everything. He's all powerful. He's everywhere. So he doesn't miss anything. He can be our tether, right? If we tether ourselves to something perfect, then it can improve our behavior. We could think better. We could act better. We could make better political systems. We wouldn't be fighting each other all the time. We could do the right thing. I mean, this is the premise that underlies the shift from ancient to medieval. And in that tethering, we have this, we talked about last week, we have this, well, more the week before, we have this dialectic between two different theories about what that means. And yeah, it's a comforting belief, right, Stephen? That you can see why it would become, especially to people who are stuck in their caste in the late Roman Empire and can't get out of it. I'm the grandchild of slaves. I'm a slave. My grandchildren will be slaves. This is never going to end. The system offers me no hope. There's like no way out from within the labyrinth that this thing is constructed. I need to get out of this in a new dimension, right? So um, you can see why they would say, all right, so we're talking about the dialectic. I was talking about the dialectic, that there are two different ways that this new tether manifests. And the official kind of religious imperial approach that is canonized as the central orthodoxy is that you do it or else. God dominates you through power. You're either going to be tortured for all eternity or rewarded for all eternity. You choose. And that, because it's an infinite punishment and an infinite reward, any finite inconvenience we might have in this life, having to obey God's will, it's nothing compared to the infinite reward versus infinite punishment of the next life. And so this is the basis of the argument for the central orthodoxy. Our numbers are bigger than your numbers, so do what we say. But this counter movement, which is what chapter 6 is about, which is equally defining for the medieval epoch, the spiritual movement, the God, Jesus as a teacher, as a moral leader movement, right? That's the basis for this kind of counter movement. They say it's not the threat versus reward of the medieval framework that's the important part. The important part is the opportunity to learn profound moral lessons and to really care about them, to care in your heart about what happens to other people, all the way down, to stop doing fake compassion and fake etiquette and having a fake civilization in which everyone is just waiting to turn on each other at a moment's notice to secure advantage. But instead, if you actually care each other, if love becomes an organizing principle, compassion becomes an organizing principle, then even when you're not being forced, you'll do the right thing. And the offer is that's a power the ancient world doesn't have. This is now, of course, the people saying this don't know the ancient world from its glory days. They know that was centuries before they were born. They only know the ancient world as the late Roman Empire. But they're saying even what the Roman Empire most pretends to be, it doesn't hold a candle compared to what if people are not just good in their external behavior because, it's that or else, but what if people are good all the way down into their hearts, which means even under duress, they're going to produce good behavior. And this leads to Beverly, and my wife and I were talking about this because she's gone back to grad school and she's studying theology, and she's talking about how, she's making me a list. I'm going to be bringing various prophets and visionaries and monks, over the next year and a half into these discussions. And I hope that people will assist me as well in doing that from the Jewish space and from the Islamic space and so on, because I really want to round this out in medievalism. This is a common theme in all of the places that medievalism holds sway, that there are these movements, these spiritual, moral movements that are aiming to get people to be good all the way down to the foundation. And that part is more important to them than any risk reward of heaven or hell. And that part is more important to them than any rewards in this life. And this is where a little piece of the ancient ethos gets preserved, although transmuted, in the medieval ethos, where it says, I want to be good and love my fellow man so much that I'm willing to suffer in this life, conspicuously suffer, right? I'm willing to do without gold. I'm willing to do without, Francis of Assisi, I'm willing to do without shoes, says Francis of Assisi. When everybody has shoes, then I'll put on shoes. But if there's still people who can't afford to have shoes, then I'm not going to wear shoes. He got in a big fight with the church over this issue. And later in life, he came to regret having not worn shoes, at least sometimes, when he got health problems and he was disabled later on. But the point is, it really illustrates this idea that the goodness, the values, the morality can't just be an act. It can't just be a behavior. That there comes a growing interest in the gnothi seauton, the know thyself, applied in a searching moral way to oneself, all the way down to the bones, just to the bottom of your character. And this is also what's motivating all the desert fathers and mothers who are, going and living in caves or in hermitages in a tiny room with a little window that people pass food into, and that's how they live. Or Simon Stylites, who lives up on a pillar, and that's it. My space is this 2 or 3 square feet that I perch on up in the air, and I own nothing else. I don't even own this. I'm only up here because nobody else wants to be. Therefore, I can take this little space, and that's how much I'm giving up in order to focus on trying to be a good person, trying to focus on, who the hell am I really inside myself? How can I search in a deep enough way to figure out whether I'm a hypocrite or not? Hypocrisy is the big bugaboo, that one of the big enemies of this spiritual movement. And not coincidentally, because remember, in the dialectic, they're up against the other group, which is all, we pretend to be the followers of Jesus, but we amass huge piles of gold and giant armies, and massive secular power. And it looks a lot like hypocrisy to the spiritual people. And so there is this push and pull between these two sides of the medieval epoch. One of the things that, I don't even remember who said it, some analyst of history was talking about, if you want to understand, if you want to read the people who write the most passionately about freedom, you have to find some place where not only was there freedom, but there were also the most abject forms of slavery. Because it's the tug of war between the two sides that causes people to really search and grow eloquent on the subject. And so this issue of hypocrisy versus authenticity is right at the center of the medieval epoch. And so we find both extremes, extreme corruption and hypocrisy on the one side, but also extreme authenticity and compassion and self-searching and humility on the other. They happen at the same time. And that might be that they have to happen at the same time, because only when they're tensed against each other do they each come into clarity, right? They bring each other into greater focus, as Heraclitus says. Ah, I see. I'll call on Phil in a moment, but Eric, welcome to our call. So yeah, we've been doing what is it, 143 of these so far,
That's
and
awesome.
we're working our way through a book by Texas philosopher Kenneth Smith, and the book hasn't been published yet. It's called Millennia and Microcosm, but all the installments of the book were published in a magazine called the Comics Journal in 1998 to 2000, and it's basically an exercise in looking at history, the last 2,500 years of history, looking at three great epochs: the ancient epoch, the medieval epoch, and the modern epoch. And the purpose of that is to try not to look at the medieval and ancient epochs as caricatures, which is what moderns always do. We always look at the past as it's just the primitive version of us, or the bad version that was there before us, and we're really the good thing and they're the
Right.
bad thing. And it's all built on this.
It would be hard to be us where we are now without those ideas, which I've always thought, well, I've always been fascinated with ancient Greece among others.
Yes,
And I've always thought, it would be hard to go back to the opportunity to have those kinds of thoughts because now we're sort of tainted with all the things that have happened since then. We're so
exactly.
overloaded with all these thoughts. It would be that was almost like a one-time thing. It's almost like we could never have it was, and it's not necessarily that it was 100% correct, but it would be hard to have certain types of ideas that they were thinking about back then.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So
And the purpose of this book is to try to help us to to have more than just the one modern worldview. To try to get to where instead of our worldview being a great labyrinth that we're stuck inside of, it becomes a tool in our toolbox. So that we get to where we have enough of that we learn enough of the ancient worldview that we can ask ourselves, what would this have looked like to Aristotle? And try to give an answer that isn't just a distortion. And then that was chapter 4 of this book, which is a very dense chapter. And now we're in chapters 5 through, I don't know, 12, 13. And the focus in these is on the medieval epoch. And we're starting the process of learning how did medieval people see the world differently, not only differently than we do as moderns, but differently than the ancients did. And so by the time we finish both of those sections, this book is then going to come back to the modern world and say, now, armed with the ancient worldview and the medieval worldview, let's turn those and gaze upon the modern world and say, what does our life and our worldview look like from these other perspectives? And so it's an exercise in self-understanding and understanding our
that's
culture.
awesome. Well,
So
yeah, I appreciate oh yeah, and then what's the dialectic?
the dialectic. So okay, can I do a 2 minute version of the dialectic? The dialectic is the idea that we don't live in a universe of Legos in which things just lie there and it's a place with some things in it and that's it, the end. It's not a great mechanism, but instead we live in a universe in which things are always becoming, like the acorn is in the process of becoming the oak, where the child is in the process of becoming an adult, or so on. And that process of growth and transformation always involves tension between opposing forces. So if you look in your own body, how does your blood sugar stay stable? Well, it's not just insulin. Insulin's only part of the picture. You also have glucagon. And glucagon and insulin are opposite hormones. They do opposite things. Insulin lowers the blood sugar by telling the cells to absorb excess sugar. But glucagon is for when you're fasting. If you're fasting, your blood sugar drops and your body releases glucagon, and glucagon does the opposite of insulin. It tells your cells to release their stores of sugar back into the blood to keep the blood sugar level steady. And if there weren't both of these sides, we'd die. And this is life is built off of these kind of like bow and arrow, the wood and the string pulling and bending on each other like shock absorbers, where things are pushing in both directions. They're opposite forces that instead of conflicting and one of them wins and one of them loses or they both destroy each other, instead they're harnessed together into a dynamic system that can keep things healthy. It can move one way, but then it can also recover and move back the other way. And that all biological systems are based on this kind of idea of the dialectic. So Hegel really gives us the quintessential formulation of the concept of the dialectic. And he says the dialectic is the basis for why the bud on a plant eventually, which is concerned with conserving itself through the ice and snow of the winter and protecting itself and being closed, why in the spring does it do the opposite? It gives up being closed and it opens up and becomes completely vulnerable and soft and open to the world. It's because it's the only way that the flower can do what it was meant to do. It's never going to succeed if it stays closed up. So it has to negate its earlier state. And then ultimately, the flower doesn't even stay the flower, but if it's pollinated, it eventually becomes the fruit, which is again a completely different set of goals and priorities than the flower had. So Hegel says there is this dialectical process of change in which we negate our previous state to enter a new state. Um, so this is kind of a shorthand version of the dialectic, and the argument is all living systems, including ecosystems and the planet and so on. They're all based on these kinds of dialectics.
Okay, awesome.
It's a Greek idea. You see a lot of it in Heraclitus when he says you can't step in the
Well,
same.
you see a lot of it in almost everywhere in Taoism too, and
Yes,
like and on the medieval topic in the Baphomet symbol that got invented later, I guess.
yes,
Uh, but
yes.
yes,
It comes up a lot. And
right.
so and so in the medieval world, there is this dialectic between, on the one hand, the central authority that takes over from the Roman Empire that wants to stamp out heresy and create one pure set of beliefs and everybody shares them and there's no other religions and there's no heresies, the end. But on the other side, you have all these people being creatively inspired by Jesus, creatively inspired by medieval by ancient and medieval Jewish teachers, creatively inspired by ancient and medieval, Muslim and Arabic and Persian teachers. And these people don't want to hew to a rigid orthodoxy. They want to explore the possibilities of spirituality. They want a great conversation to go on. And as a result, the medieval epoch is defined by this tug of war between these different forces who want to do different things with Jesus and Jesus' message, and with Jewish teachers and Muhammad and so on. So that's
Awesome.
it.
Well, I will
That's the
let you continue because this is fascinating.
Yay. Phil, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Well, as I mentioned before, it is really the relationship between knowing and being. And it seems to me being is much more dynamic because being means that we don't actually know. Even the wisest man with wisdom, he's he actually has a good opinion of what he believes. And I could see why human beings want to know what being is rather than just like drift along in this underlying shifting sands of understanding. So I was thinking, yeah, I'll mention the Tao in a sense because the Tao seems to be much more like that because uh, the Tao that can be thought of is not the eternal Tao. The Tao that is, can speak is not the eternal Tao. But the problem with human beings is that we also want to do with the manifestation in relationship to understanding of that. And we can never really get close. You get close in a sense, you could say, uh, uh, um, I'm getting old now. It's like, uh, well, Chinese philosopher who's trying very hard to manage the de,
Yeah.
which we have to have in a sense to manifest this relationship to civilization.
Yes.
But the Tao says, like the only way you could manifest that is to go with the Qing. The Qing is, in fact, the dynamic flow that you don't know what it is. That's the path to understanding, in some sense. And the East has not done all that well because, in some sense, Confucianism has created a system which is, in many ways, very tyrannical as well as goodness. But that is, but that is the relationship of knowing and being, because we're desperate to have that. And I think the really dramatic thing that happened in the West is that we're desperate to know what being is. And in some sense, like it happened during the Copernican turn, because, oh, we finally got it. The movement of the planets, we don't have it quite perfect yet, but it's, with Copernicus and then Kepler and then, Galileo and then Newton. We're pretty much there. We know what it is, instead of that, we still have plenty of leeway to drift. So in that sense, we kind of worship technology because it's helped us to get what appears to a manifestation of the Tao and the De. So we got manipulated situation because we want to be in control. I think deep down, human beings want to be like God. I mean, wouldn't it be just terrific if we actually know what's going on? The problem with that is we have not done well in that relationship of knowing, and because we have other thing that drives the De, which is the manifestation, and because we have certain passions. There's more than reason. And I ask this question in a way now, particularly looking at Heidegger. Heidegger wants to retrieve us back to the point where we're experiencing the manifestation of being, because he mentioned something that's very important about we want to transition. Well, he didn't mention that, but I think he was criticizing when he said that human beings' understanding is like, what is that? Which is the fundamental question, like, because we care to know, and that emerges, but at some point somebody says, we got it. What is that? Oh, that's that, right? We know what it is. So it's Heidegger in criticizing the transformation from the whatness to the thatness is the declaration of transferring from the question about being to the knowing of being, and objectification. Maybe I shouldn't say knowing of being, the objectification. And we've shown that that's been working pretty good in one sense. If you ignore the violence we've done to each other, because we built cities, we built all sorts of things, even our economy. I mean, there seems to be an efficiency and our understanding is there. But the problem is that in some sense, I think once you lose the veil of vagueness, it hardens the dialectic transformation, and then you're stuck in this situation in which, well, it's kind of like what's the guy that invented the atomic bomb? When Truman invited him to his office to congratulate him because he did such a good job in inventing that, it really gave us the power. And when he responded, but but I feel guilty about what I did. All right, because he finally feel that could be a destruction of humanity. And Truman responded by, get that bastard out of here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it transformed from like he was going to honor him by giving him some kind of medal of honor. Get that bastard out of here. We won the war because we have that knowledge, and there's power that rules the world, not ambiguity. Right? So is this then thing about doing the measure of things, does that mean human beings are actually in some ways fighting the two ends of knowing? We know what the thing is now, and you have somebody like Heidegger says, we care about being. What did Heidegger do? I mean, I like Heidegger a lot, but he was a damn Nazi. Did he just ignore the fact that in his search for being, he forgot to behave like a human being? You know what I mean? So therefore, the whole thing turns on some kind of passion. And passion, I don't necessarily mean consumption. I just mean power. That's what we really want, is power. You know, if it falls apart later on, that's fine. But right now, we got the power, and we're gonna control the lesser states with our power, and that's a problem. So the fact that we have both ends of the dialectic between knowing and being, Copernicus II had the theory of understanding and diagrams, and Heidegger, people in his group, has the desire to remain where the being is emerging from the background. And, you know, in fact, I asked this question, I said, when Heidegger talks about Dasein and being, what is the relationship between Dasein and being? Well, he was supposed to write about that relationship. First, he wrote about Dasein, right? And then he was going to later on write about being, but he found it too difficult to write about being as such. And so, in some sense, the thing is, once you're stuck in this other kind of Copernican revolution, that is caring for being itself, in some sense, our society has the polar opposite of both. Because in that sense, Heidegger's being is the Copernican revolution in a way, because it just focuses on being rather than knowing. I think that's a funny dialect. I wonder whether that dialectic existed throughout civilization. You know, it just become clearer. That's my thought. Okay. We are the masters of both knowing and being until there's a smarter civilization or whatever. You know, that, well, we actually got it. You got it wrong. I don't think we'll find that soon. That's it, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. Gulnaz, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Hi. I've got 3 questions, like observations more I wanted to share with you guys about the dialectic. I'm reading right now Kant, and there is a interesting, it's an image. So there is one fist closed and one is open, one is rhetoric, one is dialectica. So rhetoric, I think, is an open hand because there's an open dialogue in rhetoric. But in dialectica, if I'm not mistaken, or dialectic, is more close conversation. There is always someone is having an upper hand. He's gonna say, like in Hegel, the slave is the one who makes the history, who makes the culture, who takes over, basically. There's a convincing element in the dialectica, if I'm not mistaken. But in rhetoric, isn't it? There's not convincing, there is no even convinced person or party in the rhetoric. That's how I look at it. I'm not sure, maybe it's something to look into. And the second question, earlier you talked about paradise. It's been bothering me. Like a few years ago, I read the Paradise Lost of Milton. He had a very interesting thought there. I'd rather be slave. I'd rather be the king in hell than being a slave in paradise. I just found out that in Islamic, as a Muslim woman, I found out in Islamic Jannah means paradise, there are 100 levels. There are hierarchy. There is a hierarchy. So the prophets and the martyrs they get the best places. And someone like me, like child-free, married Christian, maybe I won't get to Jannah, I don't know. But even if I get there, I'll be like washing feet most probably of the saints. You know what I mean? I'll be the slave. So what Milton wanted to say, like being a slave in paradise is such a bad thing, because for me, to be honest, I wouldn't mind washing the feet of Jesus, or I don't know, one of the prophets. I don't mind. I don't have any problem. In the third, Phil mentioned about the objectification. Is it the objectification is the same word, the word Husserl uses in his Transcendency? Like he talks about objectivity more. So transcendence has to do more objectivity. He never says subjectivity. There's no much subjectivity. It's all about the outside world. That's why the existentialists like Sartre, for example, he was against Husserl. He's like, the man is not the center of his philosophy. The man is like as if nobody, nothing. It's all about the world. I don't know. Anyway, what is objectivity? What is subjectivity?
Well, those are three juicy questions, aren't they? That's some good stuff. All right, so let's take them one at a time. The first thing to say about the dialectic is that Kenneth Smith is part of the existentialist philosophical tradition, and as such, he's fairly critical of Kant. He inherits that criticism from Hegel. Hegel did not care for Kant's approach to understanding the human mind and thinking, and he didn't like Kant's approach to the dialectic. So Kant's approach to the dialectic, people often sum up as thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You know, you sort of create a cage match between two ideas, and then somehow a miracle occurs and you get a third idea that's better than both of them and couldn't have existed without the two. And Hegel says that almost never happens for real in the world. You can't just pit two things against each other and magically expect something beautiful to come from them. Frequently, one thing crushes another, or they both destroy or injure each other. You know, conflict is not inherently productive. He says the dialectic, the Hegelian dialectic, is thus different from the Kantian dialectic, because the Hegelian dialectic recognizes that it's not a dialectic unless it's productive, and that means it's the kind of thing you see in evolution. It's the kind of thing you see in embryogenesis. It's the kind of thing you see inside biological systems, where there has been a harnessing together of the two opposing forces. This is what Heraclitus calls palantropos, when instead of two forces just colliding and breaking each other, the conflict is mediated and changed so that they become harnessed together. And that harnessing process makes a new dynamic system. And in that new dynamic system, they're still opposites. They push in opposite directions. But when they push, they heal the system. You know, like your body releases insulin at the right time, it releases glucagon at the right time. You know, you've got both, or in a mechanical sense, in a car, you've got both brakes and an accelerator. You don't just have one or the other. And that kind of dialectic is the kind that Hegel thinks is worthy of being called a dialectic. The other thing's just a contradiction or a conflict. And so that's the answer to the first question, is all of these terms that we use in philosophy, they're value laden terms. And that means what they mean depends on what framework you're looking at them from. So Kant's framework is different from Hegel's framework. And the dialectic has a legitimate meaning under Kant that's different from the meaning it has under Hegel. And in these discussions, we're usually using it the way Hegel means it. So he would not pit rhetoric and dialectic against each other the way Kant does. He means they're essentially different terms that happen to be spelled and sound the same way. English is very confusing this way. Alas. Paradise Lost. Yes, that famous quote of Lucifer. I put it there in the chat. Here at least we shall be free. The Almighty hath not built here, for his envy will not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And many people note it's a very curious thing that John Milton does in Paradise Lost. I mean, before Paradise Lost, people always depict the devil / Lucifer / all the other names as just bad, not somebody you'd ever empathize with. He's just the bad guy. And Milton basically makes an entire epic in which Lucifer is the protagonist. It's like, what? We're going to take Lucifer's point of view? Why would we take Lucifer's point of view? And a number of people, including Harold Bloom, the literary critic, have pointed out that Milton's a weirdo. I mean, this is a very radical, strange, this sort of thing you would have been burned at the stake for a few centuries before Milton's time. I mean, it's a remarkably scary thing to do. So yeah, he's giving us Lucifer's perspective. And whether you agree with Lucifer or not is a whole separate question from the fact that, you know, Milton puts that line in his mouth. It's fascinating. It raises all kinds of questions. And your third question about objectivity and subjectivity, well, that really comes to the heart of the problem of human beings and knowing things. You know, how much do we actually know? When are we being, we in the modern world, we throw around the terms objective and subjective, first of all, as though we know when we're being one and when we're being the other. And second of all, as though the difference between them is absolute. You know, and frequently it is that, you know, highly educated intellectuals feel that they're objective and everybody else is subjective. And they feel that all good things in the modern world come from objectivity and all bad things come from subjectivity. And in doing this, they're sort of recreating this notion that the two faculties of the mind that evolution gave us, evolution, these guys, without being able to spell it out in these words, they're basically assuming that evolution was a big blunder and that they never should have given us this stupid subjective part, and that's just bad, and all bad things come from it. Everything that bad that ever happened, it comes from that side. And they should only have given us objectivity, and then that would have been great, and we could have all lived like Vulcans and been absolutely pure, perfect intellectuals. And the critique of the existentialists is that this is gibberish. You know, that when you look at the structure of the mind, the subjective part is incredibly important. Because the subjective part is the part that connects you to what you're really experiencing. And what you're really experiencing is closer to reality than the things you think to yourself, you know, in your drawing room when you're philosophizing. That stuff is more disconnected from reality. When you go out into your backyard and you actually smell the flower and it surprises you, because you forgot it was there, you're reconnecting with what's really happening. And therefore, that subjective faculty of the mind is connecting you to objective reality better and more successfully than the supposedly objective faculty of the mind that we all say is the great intellect. It doesn't have that power. It lets us look at patterns and theories and ideas and equations and logical syllogisms, but that's a world of ideas. That's not the actual world we're living in. So Hegel has this critique. He talks about this. He calls the subjective faculty Begriff. Begriff. I'll put that in. That's a German term. Begriff. And it's like it's a combination of recognizing and experiencing. So you step out of your back door, and the wind suddenly blows, and you for a moment you hadn't thought about the wind in 4 hours. You've been indoors, and suddenly you're reminded, oh yeah, it's a windy day. My goodness. And Hegel says, the thing about Begriff is that power that connects you to what you're experiencing. He says the thing about that power, it has a good side and a bad side. And the good side is it's concrete. Like this is a real concrete experience that's really concretely happening. And that gives it a certain amount of reality is associated with Begriff. It says, but the downside of Begriff is that it's parochial. You can't directly experience what I'm experiencing in Seattle because you're not in Seattle. I can't directly experience what you're experiencing in Belgium because I'm not in Belgium. We're quite a ways apart from each other. And Begriff can't help us bridge that gap, except unless we have Zoom and we could see each other. We get a little bit of shared experience. If Zoom could, transmit all the experiences that you're having, then Begriff would be capable of being more than parochial. So he says, so this is the Achilles heel of Begriff, but also the power of Begriff. It has both at the same time. It's a dialectic. The other faculty, the supposedly objective faculty that we have in our brain, he calls that Verstand. And I'll put that in the chat. I shouldn't have capitalized the E, but Verstand. And Verstand is the intellectual, logical, mathematical, systematizing, pattern forming, predicting part of our brain. And he says, Verstand, modern civilization is based on Verstand, right? This is train schedules and production plans and calendars and law codes. All of this is all Verstand stuff, right? And this is what we've built our civilization out of. He says, so Verstand has a great power that Begriff doesn't have. And the power is to find a way to understand things that are not actually part of your experience. So you can understand more widely. You can escape the parochial trap of Begriff by using Verstand. And that creates an immense power, because you can start to make decisions for other people. You can start to make abstractions like money that you could build economies out of. I mean, you can look at some little substance that's just a coloration in the ground and realize that you can make gunpowder from it, and now with guns, you can conquer the world. I mean, Verstand has this potential for massive amounts of power. It says, but it's abstract knowledge. It doesn't contain any Begriff, any actual concrete experience. And the result is that it's very easy to draw wide-ranging conclusions about the world and other people that are false. So it's although Hegel himself didn't say it, it is a logical corollary of this distinction between Begriff and Verstand, that bigotry is not an emotional subjective experience, because subjective experiences are concrete and bigotry is abstract. Bigotry is when we abstract about other people and say all Arabs are the same, all Muslims are the same, all Jews are the same, all black people are the same, all women are the same. This is abstract pattern making. This is Verstand in action. And so it logically follows that things like the Holocaust couldn't happen unless people were so intellectual and abstract. It's not because they're so hateful. It's not because they're filled with rage and emotions, and those dangerous emotions are making people do dangerous things. That's the modern explanation. But the existentialist explanation is, on the contrary, the Nazis mostly couldn't care one way or another about the people they were murdering. They treated them like numbers. They're just abstract categories. They're not actual, tangible, concrete, real people. And they often tried to arrange their policies and their behaviors to make sure they never came into contact with those people, because they didn't want any realistic, concrete, objective, experience of discovering that all these people that they've said are the same kind of thing and they're all diseases and they all have to go. That none of them was like that. They were all actual people with actual lives, and they had actual value, and you shouldn't treat them like a big number you could just subtract out of an equation and change the population of Germany. That the supposedly objective faculty, Verstand, by being so abstracting, it creates massive potential for error and catastrophe. And so Hegel has a quote. He says, to abstract is to be in error. He says, the very act of abstracting always suppresses something important into the background and pretends that it doesn't matter. And bigotry is the classic example of that. Let's just write off 1 billion people and treat them all like they're a cartoon, but they're not. Right? It's 1 billion separate people with their own lives and their own value. But through the act of bigotry, we erase 1 billion people and turn them into one little cartoon cutout character. That's Verstand. Not an emotional thing. It's an intellectual thing. And it's the source of many of the worst parts of the 20th century, contrary to what the modern analysis is. So objective and subjective are very difficult subjects, because moderns want to use them to say objective is good and subjective is bad. And that was what the Germans were telling themselves while they were rounding up people and sending them to be gassed, right? That those people are subjective. And since they're subjective, crime and badness comes from them. But we're objective, and therefore we're good. And therefore we have the right to dispose of those people. So the objective faculty was causing them to engage in this weirdly disconnected from reality and hence subjective behavior. Let's just commit genocide. Why not? That's in some ways the height of subjectivity, but it's coming from the supposedly objective faculty of the brain. If they would have spent less time with spreadsheets, or the equivalent of spreadsheets, IBM computers and numbers on people's arms, trying to abstract people and ship them all off. If instead they'd gotten to know a few Jewish people or a few Black people or a few homosexuals or whatever group they were trying to round, they actually got to know them as people, they might not have been able to engage in this behavior as enthusiastically as they did. They lacked the concrete, subjective experience of reality and fled into the abstract, supposedly objective experience of their ideologies and formulas and logical, deductions. These are difficult issues. And so this is the critique that existentialist philosophy has, is that the human mind has these dialectics in it. That evolution, or God, or both, or none of the above, however it is we got this way, saw fit to equip us with both faculties and to set them up as checks against each other. We start to go too far down the abstract road, we get a bad feeling about what we're doing. Even after they were propagandized, Nazi soldiers who were told to just shoot all these Jewish people against the wall, just shoot them all, they had a high rate of mental breakdowns because something in the begriff was warning the assassins that what they were doing was sick. This isn't right. This isn't what we're supposed to be doing. And it would break them down and make them feel sick. We need that faculty in order to remain connected to reality. So that this is what I mean. The existentialist philosophy, its critique of the human mind is that both faculties are essential. You need them both, right? You need the ability to plan and to abstract and to pattern in order to get beyond our parochial experience. But you need to check that intellect by tethering it to the subjective, concrete experience of life and emotion and intuition. And if you don't do that, the result can be monstrous catastrophes. So neither faculty is good and neither faculty is bad. And neither faculty is really objective and neither faculty is really subjective. They're two different ways of knowing, and each of them gives us a partial picture of what we're looking at. That's the existentialist take on. I mean, that would be sort of Kenneth Smith's take. That would be Hegel's take. And certainly the take of people like Heraclitus. In that, I shared that link up above to the Werner Jaeger Theology of the Early Greek Philosophers. One of the great things in the chapter on Heraclitus in there is he points out that Heraclitus refuses to use the word for knowing, noein, from which we get noesis, which is the equivalent of Hegel's Verstand. When he's talking about it's important for people to know themselves, he uses gnosis, which corresponds to begriff. But the mental faculty that he says is the highest and the most important, phronesin, I'll put that in the chat, phronesin, phronesis, that corresponds to the third faculty of the mind that Hegel says, which is Vernunft. And Vernunft is the dialectic of Begriff and Verstand. If you harness Begriff and Verstand together into a dynamic system where they check each other and critique each other, Hegel says the result is Vernunft. And Vernunft is his German attempt to translate into German what Heraclitus called Phronesin. And so Jaeger basically argues in that chapter on Heraclitus that Heraclitus is rejecting the hyper-intellectualization of Parmenides, who talks about noesis, which is Verstand. And instead, he says the highest form of thinking is not noesis, it's phronesin, which is the dialectical way of thinking. We use both of our faculties. We don't trust one and demonize the other. We recognize each has strengths and weaknesses, and we harness them together to try to get closer to the real truth. And only then can we approximate reality. Heraclitus is people quote Heraclitus as the philosopher of fire, that he thinks everything's made out of fire. And Jaeger dispenses with that, says that is a gross misreading of Heraclitus. And they also think of him as the philosopher of change. You can't step in the same river twice. But Heraclitus has a lot more fragments talking about phronesis. and the human mind and how we think and know and the ways we go wrong when we try to understand the world. That's really his core thing that he focuses on. The difficulty we have as human beings in understanding what's happening right in front of us. And he has two very similar fragments that really sum up his take. First, he says, human nature has no real understanding. We're not really capable of understanding the world the way it actually is. He says only the divine nature has it. It's what would distinguish us from the gods. The gods could look at reality and see it the way it really is. That would be a sacred quality. That'd be a divine quality, but we don't have that property. We always see some kind of distortion. That's core to his idea. And the other thing that Heraclitus says, the other fragment that sums it up that's very similar, he says, humans aren't rational. Only what encompasses us, i.e. nature, is rational. So he's saying there is an intelligence in the world that you can see by the fact that every acorn yearns to grow into an oak tree. They have a direction, and the things that they will do when conditions are the right things to do. Just like the cheetah wants to be clean, wants to learn to stalk, wants to learn to run fast, and wants to unite with the gazelle. It's the things that it wants are the right things. There's some kind of coordination happening on the Serengeti between the cheetah and the gazelle. And that represents some kind of intelligence built into nature. And Heraclitus is recognizing that. He says that level of intelligence has been so successful on such a large scale over such a long time that it deserves to be called intelligence. Whereas what people have is a kind of fragile, fumbling, occasionally getting it right kind of thing that really we should have a lot of humility about. We have to be cautious about our conclusions because we're wrong so often. So objectivity and subjectivity. You asked a straightforward, reasonable question, and I gave a long-winded answer, but this is one of my favorite topics. So anyway, Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
I was just going to be contra Phil. This line about, how could Heidegger have joined the Nazis? Well, this is a problem with history. There's a difference between where you are at the time and hindsight. The world, as far as the Nazis go, the world's picture of them is the 1945 picture. Heidegger was dealing with the 1933 picture, and the Nazis had a lot of support from the Western world at the time. They were the bulwark against the Red Terror. It's a bit like the Norse mythology, the Norse gods find Fenris as a little puppy dog. It's a junior wolf, and I thought, oh, what a cute little puppy dog that is. What a laugh, what a joke. Then Fenris gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and one day they realise they're dealing with what Fenris really is, the ravening wolf. So, I mean, when Hitler first showed up, I thought, what a cute little guy, And then, of course, things develop in time. So be wary of looking at everything, history, always in terms of hindsight. You need to put yourself in the shoes of somebody in 1933 or whatever period of history you're dealing with. And also, Rick, I think I'll have to check that one where you're saying, if only they knew Jews as human beings. Well, a lot of the Nazis did. Hitler did. Hitler had a few Jewish friends. He actually tried to protect them when he was in power. So I don't think that one's going to work. That's just a liberal dream which has failed in the past. Oh, if people only know each other personally, I think the problem there is the inability to distinguish between the individual and the group. An individual isn't a piece of jelly that you've just cut off. The big bowl of jelly is a group, and the individual people seem to think It's just a piece of jelly that you cut out and put on the side. No, it doesn't work that way. The individual is not the group. The individual might have attributes belonging to the group, but if you like to use the word essence of a group, the essence of the group is distinct from the individual. I don't know if that's really going to work with a lot of people, but this is the thing, it's a very strong inability to distinguish between the individual and the group. So I'd say be wary of that one, that only if people understood each other as human beings, they wouldn't slaughter each other. Well, they did. In many places, they knew each other. And they still would slaughter the other. I mean, Lenin's whole point is he justified the terror because, oh, I know it's pretty horrible, guys, but look at the paradise to come when we're finally shot enough people and everyone's behaving, everything's going exactly the way we want. We'll all be in paradise and all the struggle will be worth it. So I'm sorry if I might offend people with that one a bit, but thank you.
Not at all. Thank you, Stephen, for mentioning that. And I've made that mistake before in these discussions. There's a subtler point that I should have made instead, which I'll try to make now, which is when someone has been indoctrinated to the point that they have learned to hold their own begriff in contempt and to only trust their Verstand, then, as you say, having direct concrete experience of other people doesn't help, because all of that information is just treated as low priority. It's whereas the ideology that has been created through Verstand is treated as high priority. So it takes precedence. You look at the person and you might enjoy their company while they're there, but then you go back to your office and you're like, okay, well, that was nice, but now we'll send them to the death camps. Because after all, I can't let my personal feelings get in the way of our greater plan. Our greater plan is the important thing. It's not a coincidence that this happened in the country that had the highest education in the world at that time. The greatest logicians, the greatest academics, and so forth. So you're right to call me on it. Thank you for that. You're right to call me on that. It's not that they don't have direct experience. It's that they've learned not to value direct experience. And you see in a completely different vein, you see this in the writings of Christopher Alexander when he's talking about what's wrong with modern architecture and modern architecture schools. He says, why do modern architects keep making these giant behemoths that are trophies to their own ego instead of making buildings that are humane and that people want to live in? He says, every ordinary person who hasn't been trained in architecture walks into one of these behemoths and they feel alienated. They don't feel comfortable. But the architect walks in and he doesn't, if he feels that, he just deprioritizes it. That's unimportant. The important thing is the beautiful, look at the beautiful orthodoxy of my patterns. Look at the way I've made this building look like a stack of books. My vision has been projected onto reality.
Well,
and
this
I
is
know
Harry
that's
Lime
right.
from The Third Man, as he's looking
Yes.
at the world at the top of the Ferris wheel.
Yes, exactly. And
And you little people have got to know your place. My giant vision.
my
You're
giant
just
vision.
You're just a little people. I've finally put you in your place. You're just you're just the insects.
That's
Look
right.
at my grandeur.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And so for such a person, the begriff doesn't help.
Watch out for Sophie Ellis Baxter if you watch the video, that she will ruthlessly pursue her goal. She knows she's been nasty, but I want the prize.
I'm looking forward to watching that after this seminar.
Wanted the prize.
Yeah.
Hitler wanted the prize. That's the thing. Just watch out for that cat of yours when it discovers it's in a leopard. And we
Yes.
Rick's up the tree next week. And the cat's sitting there purring away.
Right, right. Yeah, so I appreciate the caution. You're right on, Stephen. Thank you. Phil, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I'm getting old, so I've forgotten all these names. I have to look it up, remind myself. But I went through a mystery. This was back in 1980 when I was in New York City. And I went to the Museum of Modern Art, and I saw one of the minimal paintings of Ad Reinhardt, who was an abstract expressionist. He was not a minimalist. I looked at it, I stared at it for more than a half hour, because he paint very subtle paintings that if he had painted even more subtle than that, he would have to give up painting because there was no representation left in his painting. In fact, I think later on he did some of those minimal paintings. And what I did was then I went to the next room and I saw a painting by Frank Stella, who's a sort of like a constructivist in a way. And he had these paintings that were, well, the paintings I saw was there was a lot of vertical and horizontal lines. And later on, I heard him say something that puzzled me, and I think still puzzle me, because I heard it wrong, as far as I'm concerned. He said, "What you see is what you see." That sounds like, sounds like phenomenology to me. I mean, but I misinterpret it like what you see is what you see. What you see is objective in a sense, right? Because if it's phenomenology, it is objective in the sense that that's the first mediation of a phenomena. And once again, it goes back to man as a measure of all things. And I believe that he was saying that art is no longer so much about representation, but about creation. So you see his painting, he's created his new images, and each one is like born into the world and help you see what you see is what you see, because they're very, very objective, because they're actually made. So that was puzzling to me at that time, and I painted. In fact, I painted a very important painting of mine of a fallen angel, and the fallen angel is on the top, and then essentially a comment on Frank Stella, which sort of said, X is identical to X, okay? Which means that man has gotten to the point where he creates reality, not just represents reality. I myself do not believe that. I myself believe in what's called not representation, but representation, spelled the same way. But if God or what nature presented, I am presenting a variation on that representation. And so that was interesting, but now I understand Frank Stella, that he's talking about production and creation. And because if you go around the world, mankind has created all sorts of things that did not appear in nature, right? The Eiffel Tower, all sorts of things. So what you see is what you see. That actually is the Eiffel Tower, right? So that's interesting. He was pretty high fluting in the art world. And so there was a third artist that struck me who said something different, because many people thought of Robert Irwin, Southern California artist, as a conceptual artist. He did, because he did these kind of weird things. And people said, "Oh, you're a conceptual artist." He said, No, I'm not. I am a perceptual artist, which means he perceives things. And one time he said something very interesting to me. And it was, was really a criticism of Bishop Berkeley. Because with Bishop Berkeley, the idea, the concept you have, the idea you have is what's real in the world. So he used the metaphor like Bishop Berkeley said, if a tree fell in the forest and nobody was there to hear it, did the tree fall in the forest? Obviously it didn't, because there's nobody to perceive it. And he said, yeah, Robert Irwin said the more curious question would be, would there be human beings that trees never fell? Because it's our experience that transforms us into who we are. Through millenniums of experience, and it continues to transform us. So perception of the world is certainly as important as concept of the world, right? So there goes a round trip. I mean, who are you going to believe? Robert Irwin or Clifford Stills? No, not Clifford Stills. Well, Frank Stella, right? Because now we live in a twin world, and there are trees and forests. Well, sometimes not even that, because we have plantation. That still exists in a natural world. But a lot of us have kind of more or less ignored the natural world. We like to go to Machu Picchu, right? Because what you see, it's what you see. It's been created by human beings. Now, which is real? Is it our creation that's real? Because even if you take it in the most minimal sense, our creation is a representation of what could be, right? So I just want to present that puzzle because I made a painting and respond to that, you know, because Frank Stella did not say, you know, at first I thought it was like thing against ACFA, you know. ACFA said, what you see is what you get. I mean, it's a true representation. Of course it isn't. But he said, what you see is what you see. Which means it's, in some sense, it's cut off from nature itself to a certain degree. I wouldn't say it totally cut off from nature itself in the sense we produced it, we imagine it, we create it, we represent it. There's nothing behind the painting except the painting itself. That is what you see. Now, he's not going to argue if you went in the forest and you saw a tree that you create that. But there's so much in the world that confronts us. It's objectification of the world by man-made objects that captivates us, you know. We did, after all, send the man to the moon. We said things outside of the, you know, heliopause, you know. So it's a tricky thing that we live in a modern society between, you know, presentation and representation. That's why I like to get the middle term, representation, because that goes back to Ad Reinhardt, you know. If he went any less, then it just become objectified in the world, not a representation of either a spiritual thing or a physical thing that's produced by nature. So I thought I'd throw that in there because that's a deep thing that came out of art, the argument about,
Thank
you know, because we have bridges, we have Eiffel Towers, we have all sorts of things, you know. You go to New York City, well, I guess you could go to Central Park, but you go there to see the Empire State Building, you know. I used to go there, go on top of the World Trade Center, except it get destroyed. That's also what you see. It's what you see. We destroyed it. Okay, that's it, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. Gulnaz, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
About Eiffel Tower, I came to a little bit late to this group because I am learning French for the past 4 years or so. So I was with the French group discussing reading books. And one of the girls said such an interesting thing, Eiffel Tower. I didn't know, by the way. It is in an A ladder shape. And it is that A letter represents the name Alice, the girl, the first letter of the name Alice. That was I don't know, lover or girlfriend of Eiffel. I didn't know that. I just learned from them. So yeah. I just wanted to go back to earlier what we talked about Hitler and all, because I know I started the conversation before, but I couldn't finish it. This year, we're going to celebrating 50 years of the death from the time, 50 years of the time the Hannah Arendt died. You guys know she was very famous philosopher, especially she talked about maybe because she was Jewish and she was very much directly involved in that war of Second World War, and she wrote that totalitarianism and the banality of evil. I have a problem with that word banality. When we call something banal, banal for me means plain and simple. There's nothing complicated about it. I don't like the word complicated either, but you're just removing, like I said last time, Nazi Germany didn't appear overnight. It took, in my mind, according to my calculation, 200 years for sure, minimum. So, and then it came to that point where there was no way back. They had to continue with something as drastic as that, horrible. But then second point of that banality of evil, you're also removing your own participation in it. Like, I have nothing to do with this evil ever. I don't know why they attacked me. I don't know why they attacked the Jewish and the Slavic people, like specifically. I don't understand. If anyone has got an answer for that, why they fixated themselves on these two countries, why he wanted to do the Napoleon's mistake, Hitler. What was wrong with him? I read, by the way, Mein Kampf 20 years ago. He really hated. I don't know. He wanted to wipe the Russia out. And I read also Philip K. Dick is one of my favorite science fiction writer. Oh my God, I love him. The Man on a High Castle. Yeah, imagine the world where he won. Yeah. By the way, there's not much difference. The same old nonsense, like wars happening. I don't see any difference. And recently I saw such an interesting documentary. They were comparing, this Cambodian genocide happened during the 1970s. The Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot, I think the guy, and he was compared to Hitler. I'm like, no, you cannot compare. Pol Pot killed his own people. Hitler, he was a nationalist. By the way, I am doing right now, I'm so sorry, guys, I'm all over the place. I am doing right now realism, nationalism, internationalism discussion about Mearsheimer's book. Where we talk about the American hegemony, how they failed. Yeah, as an American hegemon, they failed. But the big part of that international, national realism, I'm sorry, I'm still learning. I may not be very familiar with the terminology, but the big word is nationalism. Nationalism means it's self-interest. There is nothing wrong when a country puts forward his own self-interest / nationalism. I know they didn't have to. Biggest mistake Hitler did, he just went fascist. He didn't have to do that, all the atrocities, but it was a war. If you talk about the crimes committed, you can find a lot from the side of the winners, even the histories written by the winners. Today we read, yeah, the losers also underground wrote their own history. I mean, you can find, I am learning Italian, the Italian girls were raped by the French I don't want to say the nationalities, but anyway, and the Germans also had the same, like, why are you doing this to us? You asked for it. Like, we've got every right to come and destroy your country, like totally destroy you to the ground. Today, when I travel Germany, I love the country. I swear, I want to go around kissing the ground, because I'll be honest with you, those people were destroyed. Between the winners and the losers, Soviet Union after the collapse, I'm sorry, the Soviet girls, they were prostitutes in Germany. I'm sorry. The Germany won in a way. In a way. Today I'm I'm comparing, I'm like, maybe Hitler is sitting there, I don't know, being happy in wherever he is, maybe in hell, like Lucifer's thing. He's a romantic guy, most probably. I'd rather be reigning in hell, and he might be reigning in hell right now, happy for Germany, even though, yeah, they have immigration crisis. I'm rambling, I'm going to shut up, but I hope I made the point.
Thank you, Gulnaz. Yeah, it's you've touched on so much rich material. I really can't do justice to it. There's too many things to respond to. So, but that's okay. Bring them up again in the future, and we'll be able to talk about them more directly. Before I call on Phil, I'm going to give the text a chance, because we've been at this for 2 hours and haven't really got to the text yet. So we've done the intro, kind of what chapter 6 is about in general. But I wanted to, if we go to sentences 3 through 5 of paragraph 3, I'm gonna paste them in here again just to make sure they're fresh for everybody in the chat. This is where where he's talking about why he's using William Blake, who lives in the modern era, as his example of the medieval era. Right? He's opening this chapter that's talking about medieval spirituality by quoting with a whole bunch of William Blake quotes. And so he says, Blake is far subtler and more discriminating than most Christians. He may even be the unrecognized Goethe of Christian Europe, and like Kierkegaard, the very scourge of God against a materialist Christendom. So what he's doing here is he's drawing comparisons between Blake and Goethe and Kierkegaard, and sort of distinguishing between the forms. So what they share in common, Kierkegaard and Goethe and Blake, is that they all self-identified as Christians. In fact, Goethe specifically identifies as a Lutheran, and Kierkegaard, his entire dialectical philosophy, his post-Hegelian dialectical philosophy, is rooted in the cosmology and psychology implicit in the theology of Christianity. He's attempting to apply Hegel's dialectic to a Christian conception in which the religious mind is higher than the merely practical mind. And so Hegel lays out these different dialectics and these different stages of cognitive development in Homo sapiens. Well, and the thing about the rumor that Goethe was pagan is Goethe put a lot of kind of respect for nature into his approach to Lutheran Christianity. He and Hegel were pen pals and used to write to each other. And the book by Karl Lobeth, From Hegel to Nietzsche, 19th century German philosophy, he has a whole section about the friendship between Goethe and Hegel and their Lutheranism. It's well worth reading. And yes, so there was a certain amount of paganism, and Goethe and Hegel would look at each other and highly respect each other, and each of them saw them as being more like each other than pretty much anybody outside the pair would have thought they were like. I mean, we'd all look at them and go, wasn't Goethe kind of a pagan or naturalist, pantheist, and Hegel's kind of a philosophical Lutheran? How are they the same thing? And neither of them would be recognized by Martin Luther as a Lutheran. He would see them both as being way deviant from what he considered Lutheranism to be. So what Kenneth Smith is giving us here is an enormous variety or range of voices that criticize the medieval Christian or post-medieval Christian orthodoxy not from an atheist perspective or from the perspective of a different religion, but from people who identified as Christians. But their concept of Christianity was so radically different from the norm that, you know, a few hundred years before they would have been burned at the stake. Blake, for sure, Goethe, for sure, Kierkegaard, for sure, all of them would have faced the stake. And so he's basically he's justifying the use of Blake here as his opening bid to get us into thinking about the other half of medieval Christianity, the spiritual, the exploratory, the interfaith, you know, version of the religion, by showing some of the diversity that exists. So when he compares Blake to Goethe, part of what he's, you know, I think Stephen's reference to paganism is right on. It's the pantheism specifically that's part of what he's drawing the comparison on, because Blake's famous letter to the Reverend William Trussler, where he painted a painting of a tree, and William Trussler didn't like it and didn't want to pay for it, and William Blake is saying, well, you know, I mean, sure, maybe you don't like it, but I like it. And what I'm painting is what I see in nature. When I look at nature, I see what I put on the. Now we're talking about Phil's topic, right? I put on that. I'm representing to you what I see when I look at a tree, when I look at nature, and you know, and nature is full of this wisdom and beauty. And why wouldn't I want to capture that on the canvas? You know, so he's got that respect for nature that is a particular flavor of Christianity, and not the Central Orthodox medieval flavor, in which nature and the natural law and natural beauty are sacred things, right? This is core to Blake. And then he compares him to Kierkegaard, because Kierkegaard spent his whole career writing this defense of Christianity by updating it into these dialectical Hegelian forms, and talking about the importance of transcending your practical self to become a spiritual holy self, a good person, right up until he's had it with the Danish church, and how complacent everybody is, and how they say that they're following Jesus, but then they turn around and screw each other over in business, or ignore the suffering of their fellow citizens. And he then writes this whole series of articles that has been afterwards cited the attack on Christendom. And it doesn't mean he's defending Christendom against attack. He's attacking Christendom. Kierkegaard saying, how can you call yourselves followers of Jesus? What the hell is wrong? What the hell is wrong with my entire country and its approach to religion? And Kierkegaard comes out like this wide-eyed, fiery, you know, prophet from the desert, you know, from the depths of Copenhagen. He's writing this assault on what he considers to be modern distortions against the spirit of Jesus and the spirit of spirituality, and, you know, all of these things. And, you know, we're getting this comparison from Kenneth Smith between Blake and Kierkegaard, because he's asserting, therefore, you know, using the standard poetic devices of parallelism, he's asserting that William Blake too is not only more discerning than Christians, not only does he have more respect for nature than most, you know, rank and file Christians do, he's more critical of the rank and file versions, the distortions of Christianity. He's more perspicacious, he's more observant, and he's less willing to tolerate. He tolerates diversity, but he's not willing to tolerate the gross violations of the heart of compassion. So we're supposed to have compassion for one another. That's the teaching of Jesus. We're supposed to respect creation and respect one another, and be a brotherhood of man. We're not supposed to be turning a blind eye to one another's suffering, and we're certainly not supposed to be trampling over nature as though God didn't create it. It's holy. It's a sacred thing. It needs to be protected. So all of this is he's drawing in here in this rich, chewy, juicy sentence 3, and in doing so, he's sort of setting up Blake as an example of what happens when, even in the modern world, what happens if you go back to the original source, if you go back to read, you know, what is Jesus teaching? Not, will Jesus get me out of hell? But what is Jesus teaching? It tends to draw you into this worldview of being impatient with hypocrisy, and being, you know, humble, and being appreciative of nature, and treating one another with compassion. And that these are kind of revolutionary ideas that even 1800 years after Jesus's time will get you in trouble with the people around you, or at least will get you in trouble with the power structures that exist in the modern world. Blake is having some arguments because the lessons of compassion and humility and wonder are not welcome by the people just trying to do business around him. So that's what he's setting up for us, and that's why even though Blake is out of the medieval period, Kenneth is using him as an example of the spiritual side of the medieval period. It's like he's a specimen. He's a throwback. He's like J.S. Bach, making the best Baroque music pretty much at the death of the Baroque era. After Baroque is passé and everybody else has moved on, here's J.S. Bach making the best Baroque music anybody's heard. William Blake is really capturing this spirituality after the medieval epoch is already over. So Phil, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I would like to respond to what Hannah Arendt said, the banality of evil. And I think it actually makes sense. I've said this before, not specifically about Hannah Arendt, but I have to begin when I went back to San Jose, my alma mater, when I went to university. And because I was young and the gallery director, the university gallery director was young, and we were reasonably good friends. And I first asked her, why are all the shows at San Jose State so bad? She did not argue with me. She didn't say, well, that's your opinion. So after talking for a while, yeah, and she apologized. Said, well, the reason is, the chairman of the art department, the dean, the provost, the gallery committee, the outside committee. I mean, there's just a lot of pressure. So I myself thought, well, if you're a defender of excellence in art, you're the gatekeeper, not somebody's in the system. And so you have, in a sense, sold out. Now, she immediately corrected me. She says, no, I have not sold out. I have bought in, meaning I bought into the system. Because we are all in systems that in order for you to survive in a particular system, unless you're extremely resistant, is that you have to buy in, otherwise you lose your job, all sorts of things will happen. And all systems have structured the realities so tightly, whether it's a capitalist system or whether it's a religious system, that it's hard to disobey the structure itself. So what Hannah Arendt was trying to say, I think, was, yeah, there was something funny about the evil that came out of Germany. I mean, of course, we say Hitler's on another level, but a lot of the Germans bought in to the system. They were behaving very banally. And so instead of saying, oh, this is not a good thing that we're doing, they have to survive in the system. And I think that's what the banality is, because they were all followers, particularly if you're trying to fight against the government, which is penetrated with system structures that's about nationalism, in an extreme case. And if you didn't do it, you could find yourself in a prison camp. So everybody became banal, not because they were thinking, but that's just the way to survive. And so we're all, you have to understand, we're all caught in this double bind. Do I want to do the right thing? Do I want to live another day? So, and it's very, very hard to be in a position of that sort and said, no, I want to do the right thing. Well, unfortunately for you, doing the right thing lands you in prison. All you have to do is go to Xinjiang. People are being tortured all the time, Organ harvesting because you stood up to the government. So I think that was the reason. It wasn't that they were super smart and they shouldn't have been doing that. It was the pressure, because what the pressure does is you want to do the right thing, and then this other thing of survival sandwiches you down and crush you. So the question we all have to ask in a way is, in this society or any other society, who is bearing down that prevents me from being truly a human being? That's my answer. That's it. Phil.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, thank you for talking about that, because in my response to Gulnaza's questions, I did not do justice to that question, did I? I mean, she raised a question and I let it go. But yeah, but the banality of evil is for sure a major part of it, is what you're talking about. That the motivation is not, I'm going to hurt these people. It's like, if I don't cooperate, I lose my home, I lose my job, I go to jail, so I have to cooperate. That's a big part of it. But in Eichmann in Jerusalem, it's one of those, I'd say, in the top 20 books of the 20th century that every single person should read, because it talks about things that are so important, and that many of which fly in the face of our popular misunderstandings of why things happen the way they did. And she talks about the fact that we're looking for a mustache twirling, villain with horns and a tail, and instead we find this petty bureaucrat who doesn't think he's being promoted enough, and kind of, there's the evil that he did, which is real evil that resulted in significant deaths, arose from this bland personality he's just a functionary. He sees himself as a cog in a wheel who would like to be a bigger cog and get some promotions, and other than that, and he's got an ideology, and the ideology makes all of this acceptable to him. But the ideology is how he reconciles the fact that he has to go along with all of this in order to, advance himself in the world.
Part of that is that you can pass the buck, The general told me to do this. What am I supposed to do? I mean, so sometimes you could just pass it off as like, even if things turn bad, and Germany did not win the war, you say, well, what do you expect me to do? We all know that soldier, for instance, get court-martial. Like, yeah, you could pass the buck, but the lieutenant told me to do this. So that the escape hatch as well. So
yes,
to transcend that, you have to truly be a good person to say, or to at least hide out, if not to go directly against the government. Hide out and lay low, so that you don't get snagged into this thing where you have to or pass the buck and not get in trouble. That's it, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, and it's part of how modernity works, is through globalization, and to make sure that there's nowhere you can go. How do you get away from it? You can't. It's the economy owns everything now. You can't go to some other country that has a different economy, because nobody has a different economy. And even China and Russia are part of this giant economic engine that is the whole world. And the purpose of that, globalization sounds like, well, yeah, one world, let's all take care of each other. That's not what globalization means to the economy. It means everything is owned by the economy. There's nowhere else to go. If you don't like the pressure the economy puts on you, tough shit. Accept it or die. Those are your options. You can either go along with it or you can die, because there aren't going to be any alternatives left, because every single square inch of the planet has been captured into the net of this economy. It is in a sense, modernity defined in terms of medievalism is medievalism without God. So instead of committing genocide to try to create one religion, we do genocide to create one economy. There will be just one giant economy, and there will be no culture that exists anywhere that has the strength to stand against that. An economy was previously just one part of a culture. It's an aspect of culture. But religion used to have real power, and even art had real power. All kinds of different aspects of culture used to have real power, but now nothing has any power except as an extension of the market. Even religions, they need their money to pay their rent. And so they have to take tithes. They have to. Even aside from taking care of people, if they don't get the money, they close down. I can't tell you over the course of my life how many old church buildings I've seen up for sale because the market, is digesting them, and those churches couldn't survive. So this is part of the banality again. It's like it's hard to there's you want a mustache twirling villain. Where's the bad guy? We all know what to do. If we have a simple, straightforward, there's the bad guy, let's get him, and that'll make the world better. And this is the appeal of fascist movements: is they almost always involve picking an outsider, or a degenerate insider who is the enemy, who's the source of all evil. Let's get him. But in the case of the modern system, there's no single individual anywhere who's the bad guy, the entire system itself. In fact, our participation in the system strengthens the system and helps it do evil. Every time I buy groceries, migrant farm workers are being oppressed. Every time I buy clothes, garment workers who are living in horrific sweatshop conditions are being oppressed. This is all of the things we depend on are coming from, exploitative relationships. And I can't walk around naked. I can't not eat. I don't have enough land to grow my own food, and I don't know how to do it. So I have to buy in order to survive. And thus, all of these evils are being strengthened by me in a more powerful way than if I were voting for them. I'm giving them money, right? That's the real lifeblood of the way that it oppresses. So this is part of what she means by the banality of evil is, we're looking for a monster or a devil, and we still talk about Hitler like he's a monster. But what we find when we actually look into the details of these people is so many of them are just boring people. They did evil out of a kind of she talks about Eichmann's lack of creativity, lack of imagination, his failure to think through even basic consequences of his own ideas. He's a lazy, sloppy thinker. He's a bureaucrat. He's a dull person, not very smart, not very passionate. I mean, it doesn't arise from great wells of hatred. He's just, doing his job. And the fact that his job involves murdering lots of people, well, that's not his business. He's just obeying, right? It's banal. It's just gross. And she took a lot of grief, including from the Jewish community, for writing honestly what she saw in Eichmann, because they wanted a monster. There had to be a monster behind this horrible thing that was done to them. And for her to say, I wish there were, but instead there's just these insipid, boring bureaucrats. They're who's behind this. And no monster. That's why she put a report on the banality of evil. She was already getting pushback. So she was basically saying up front, I know this isn't what you wanted to find, but this is the kind of dull idiot who was on trial, who contributed to the mass murder of all these people. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I was just going to say that there's a lot of people who look at Goethe and say, what a marvelous mind, what a, self-contained, cultured. This man must have been, from the moment he was born, just such a perfect human being. And that's where they get it wrong. If you look at his early works, like the Sorrows of Young Werther, who's he writing about? Himself. This was a guy, when he was a teenager and a young man, was subject to the fiercest of depressions. And Goethe's work was in overcoming that. How to rise above the depression. We live in an age when people look for crutches. They say they're autistic. There's just a huge, 99% of the population is now autistic. They want a crutch. Yeah, I would like a crutch, but I have to consider what Jesus said to the guy by the pool, pick up your bed and walk. And this is what Goethe did. He picked it. Oedipus leaned on his crutch, but Goethe thought, well, I'm going to have to pick up my crutch and learn to walk. But I mean, this guy, he had huge sensitivities. I suspect he must have had the fiercest depressions that one could think of, and yet he developed the ability to overcome it. I don't think people understand the young Goethe very well. Thank you.
Sorry, the doctor has ordered me to, not the doctor, but nurse has ordered me to do some physical therapy. So
Okay.
I'll just
Take
leave
care,
you.
Phil. It was good to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing about the history of modernity is that as modernity has advanced, it has eroded the traditional cultural structures that used to be very supportive of people. There were a lot of ways you could live in Goethe's time that you can't live today. There are professions that are gone. There are ways of life that are gone. There's a sort of a, and even in my own life, I can see it. Decade by decade, there's a little tightening of the screws. How much do you have to produce in order to break even? Kind of increases and increases. And you see this a lot if you look at 16th century, 17th century, 18th century poets, writers, philosophers, artists, and you composers. You look at how much money did they produce? How are they able to make ends meet? And a lot of them were able to do it in ways you just can't do it today. It's just astonishing. It doesn't, I don't think, take anything away from Goethe and the struggles he went through as a youth to say, you know, when I was a kid, when I was a high school graduate in '84, right out of high school, I could get a job in the VA at minimum wage, you know, programming on their new computer. And you can't do that today. Those jobs are all gone. You need a degree to do it, and most of those positions are closed. There's a lack of mobility. There's a lack of a social ladder, and when we
You
think
have
of his,
much to thank Milton Friedman for.
yes, yes, and when we
This
think
is
of
the
it as
80s.
when we think of it as a social ladder, we're focused on the travel that you do through it. But if you look at it differently, there's a lack of niches in the economy, different niches organized incrementally. And together they make a ladder, but even any one rung on the ladder wasn't just a rung, it was a niche. You could live there. If you were willing to live at that level, relative poverty, but enough to make ends meet, you know, you could do it in 1984 in June in a way that you can't do it today. So there's I think the other key example I like to do is the thing about how when I was a kid and we would drive across the country, every time we stopped for gas, my brother and I had to get the squeegees out and clean the heck out of our windshield. You know, it was just covered in bugs and they were crusted on there. It was getting to where we couldn't see. We had to pull over. Sometimes we'd pull over to a gas station when we still had gas because, I mean, it was just like bugs all, you know, cross country driving through these farmlands. You're just covered in bugs on the windshield. You could do that now and maybe only have to clean your windshield once a day. And that's because 90% of the insects that were alive, you know, the population when I was a kid, they're gone now. So kids growing up today, they don't know it was ever like that. They hear us talking about that and they think, oh, those old fogies with their tall tails. That's just Paul Bunyan stuff. None of that's real. And you're like, I don't know how to convey to you, young'un, that the world has changed. And it has changed a lot in a very short time. My grandpa, who grew up in a logging family in Northern California, he used to say, people today have no idea how many trees there used to be. They were everywhere. He says, you know, it's like the volume of trees in the Pacific Northwest was just astonishing. He's, you know, and you know, he died in 2009, but which was, you know, some time back, shall we say. But even at that time, there were still more trees than there are now in the Pacific Northwest. The number just has been going down decade by decade by decade, a radical transformation. When I was a kid in Seattle, there were a lot of vacant lots that were overgrown. And as kids, we'd play in them. You know, it's like there'd be a spot where there used to be a house, or maybe someday there was going to be a house, but there wasn't a house now. And we'd go out there in the dirt with our toy dinosaurs and little toy army soldiers, and their little dinosaurs and army soldiers would have little wars, and they'd be climbing up the slopes of a little WB in a gravel pit, and they'd be climbing up the slopes of the gravel pit. And all those places are now full of houses. And when kids, I wonder about kids today when they grow up and there's no empty space to go to in Seattle. I mean, there's parks. You can go to the official park that is officially designated that has been set aside, but it's not like on your block there'll be 1 or 2 vacant lots. There used to be. So there's less give in the fabric of society. There's less breathing room. And that applies economically, but it also applies emotionally. If you're struggling with depression, now the treatment is, what is the minimum number of sessions we can give you, and how quickly can we get you on a drug so that you're making profit for a drug company? And of course, it may or may not work. And if it doesn't work, well, we'll switch you to another one. And if that doesn't work, we'll switch you to another one. We'll just do that for the rest of your life. And maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. But the point is, we want to put the minimum into you we can, so we can quickly turn you into a producer. You're supposed to produce value for the economy. And somebody in Goethe's position, he had a very different relationship to depression and to struggle, in that, as bad as it is, that was mostly the thing that he was wrestling with, not this additional thing of, and by the way, if you don't produce quickly, we're going to get rid of you.
You might be underrating how tough it was to live in the 18th century. For example, the child mortality rate was double what it was in the time of Oliver Twist.
Yes.
We've experienced enormous progress.
You're right.
But my word to all socialists is this, that why don't they? Go and do your socialism. You can go and create a collective and live out the socialist principle. This is my problem. All the socialists I hear are always saying, we want to control the global means of production. I don't see them really, they try, but they just don't. Well, go and form these collectives, go and form this charitable society, go and do it. I'm not saying I'm absolutely anti-socialism either. I mean, people don't realise this, the fascists were socialists. The modern world is absorbed by socialism. Rudolf Steiner copied it from somebody else, but his critique of socialism was this, that the socialists are the most anti-social people I've ever met.
Yes, I've heard that.
And I see the fault in the socialist attitude is people want their socialism to be delivered to their front door on a platter. They don't want to work for it.
I'm with you as far as you're going, but socialism is neither here nor there, because Goethe didn't live under socialism. So when I contrast life under Goethe, in his time, to what it would be like for him struggling with that today, I'm really not contrasting capitalism with socialism. I'm trying to, and I'm poorly, I grant you, trying to make a point that Kenneth Smith talks about, which is that, and this is a point that actually you've made before too, I'm just making it a different way, which is that many of the moral features of modern culture don't derive from intellectualism or capitalism or any of these other things. They're survivals of older cultures. They're fragments left over of kind of old humane traditions that are still around. And so many of them are medievalisms rather than socialisms. That we're a brotherhood of man, we're supposed to take care of each other, we have a duty to, give charitably to the poor. These aren't, in European and cultures derivative from Europe, these aren't socialist ideas. They're primarily medieval ideas. And for example, Islam preserves them. There's a duty in Islam to give. You're expected to help take care of the poor.
Well, that guy lying in the gutter is beloved by God.
Beloved by God.
So, for the love of God, I think that's just where the word charity comes from. Is
exactly
for the love of God.
So I'm not trying to describe a socialist paradise. I'm trying to describe a medieval paradise because medievalism is what we're talking about. So Goethe lived at a time when modernity hadn't finished digesting a lot of these medieval holdovers. They still survived into the early modern period, and they gave him a little breathing room in which to struggle with these things. And yeah, the downside is huge infant mortality, which was, you know, there was a lot. That was also huge during the medieval period. That wasn't a modern innovation. You know, high infant mortality goes way back. So
Well, by the late 19th century, the average bird in the Western world could just occasionally afford a good meal, at least
yes,
once a week.
yes,
I mean, people used to eat porridge if they were lucky, and not even good porridge. By the late
yes.
19th century, you could occasionally go out and have a steak dinner.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, yes, the sorrows of young Werther. There are people who will read Goethe's Faust and then say, I'm done with Goethe. But you're right, Stephen. They should read The Sorrows of Young Werther. It was a hugely influential work, and it gives us a lot of insight into who Goethe really was. Yeah, thank you for that. Gulnaz, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
I just wanted to say maybe my observation about Hannah Arendt comes from my own ignorance because I didn't read her books. I read the essays and articles here and there, and that was it. And that was my first reaction. How come? But anyway, yeah, it's most probably my ignorance. I wanted to go back to, you know, Nazi Germany. They had then allies like Italy and Turkey. Turkey wanted to have their empire back, old empire back. Uzbekistan, where I'm from, it was part of their old empire. If they want today, we would be part of a Turkish empire. No, if I have to choose between Turks and Russians, I choose Russians. But if I have to choose between Russians and Europeans, I choose Europeans. Because there's a lot of socialism still in Russia. It's a Putin's Russia. It's not Russia the way they see their own country, and it's not the Asian countries. If you guys look at pay attention, the Orient has got we are very much based on like presidential countries. We are like more kingdoms, and you guys pass the European Western side of the world is more, they pass, it's in the past, it's been, they are more liberal now, neoliberal, and they're going to libertarianism. I am not interested in that. But what I wanted to say, because I'm not romantic that much, and I don't have much faith in human nature. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Gulnaz. Yeah, one of the exercises of this book that Kenneth Smith is trying to engage us in is to understand the idea that no modern human being is in a position to evaluate what human nature is, but we always do. We're always told that we're good judges of human nature and we know what's possible. And a big deal of what we say is possible is nothing could be better than this. This is a practical utopia. It's not a utopias are impossible, but this is as close as you can get. So don't strive for anything more. Don't exert yourself. Don't run any experiments. Just accept this. Just go with it. No one's ever been better than this. This is what we say over and over. And it's in the name modern. Everybody else is obsolete. We're the modern ones. We're the best, right? We're as good as it gets. And the problem is we're the least historical epoch of all time. Every other epoch before us was very interested in the past. Whereas for us, the past is mostly just a rationalization of the present. We say, see, they were bad, but we're good, so yay us. I think part of what Kenneth's trying to do is to show us examples of human nature in the ancient world to see how different they are. Not just how similar, because obviously we're the same species, but to see how different it's possible to be in the ancient world from the modern world. And then now what we're starting into is doing that in the medieval world, kind of step by step, starting to see what for us is an alien worldview of looking at the world through medieval lenses. And if we can do that, then instead of a sample size of one, looking at other moderns and saying, well, this must be all that's possible, we'll then be in a position to say, well, medievals are possible, and ancients are possible, and moderns are possible, and they're different from each other. So maybe there's more possibilities out there, many more possibilities. If people have been around for 200,000 to 400,000 years, And our sample size is really tiny. We don't really know what's possible for human beings. And that means we don't really know the full scale of human nature. We don't know what people could be like. We only know what people are like now. And we know what people seem like in the way that we misinterpret history, which is usually organized to justify the way we are now. Say, oh, don't bother being better because they were just as bad as we are. And it's why I find it so interesting that although the Greeks were perfectly happy to slaughter each other for all kinds of reasons in the ancient world, they never did it on the grounds of religious genocide. Not once. And to us, that's unthinkable. Well, of course, everybody's killing everybody all the time, and religion, everybody always kills each other over religion. It's like, yeah, but the Greeks never did. That wasn't among all the things that they were ready to fight at the drop of a pin, but not over that. And if you don't have the example of the Greeks never, ever, ever doing it, you would think that human nature is bound to fight over religion because we didn't have any examples of, the opposite. So it's part of why I really like studying history and archaeology, is to give us these examples of people behaving in ways that until we see that example, we would have sworn people can't be like that. In a nutshell, that's what the ancient Greeks had in mind with the Olympic Games. You think you know how fast somebody can run? Well, let me show you this guy who's from Corinth. He can run faster than anybody you've ever seen. And once you've seen it, now you have to believe it. And now your concept of what human beings are capable of, it has dilated. It's like, oh, so now that is possible. I thought it wasn't, but I saw it with my own eyes. That guy jumped over that bar that I would have sworn nobody could get over, and he just did it. So evidently that is possible. So this is part of why, this is so rewarding to study this stuff, is we see people behaving in ways that we wouldn't have thought people could behave. And then it changes our concept of ourselves. If the Greek Oracle at Delphi says, Gnothi seau, to know thyself, it doesn't just mean know myself as an individual. It also means know us as a species. Who are we? What are we capable of? We need these. I have a friend who calls them specimens. We need specimens who show us, wow, I guess somebody can be like that. I guess that is possible. Who knew? I like Martin Luther King Jr. He was pretty sure he was going to be assassinated. He told his friends and family, I think this is it. I think I'm going to be murdered. But then he didn't run away. He'd say 99 out of 100 would run away and say, I'm done. I'm done with the big speeches. I really don't want to die. I'm going to stop. But he's like, it's okay. I mean, I'd rather not die. But if I have to die in order to talk to the people, then I'll die in order to talk to the people. Because, this dialogue is more important than my life. We see that happen, and then we go, oh, I guess it can happen. I guess people can behave that way. I also like Harriet Tubman. You'd think escaping from slavery was heroic enough. But then she went back to get other people out. She went to the place where they wanted to murder her. And she snuck in there and got other people out. You'd say, wow, what a hero. And then you find out, then she did it again and again and again and again, over and over and over, putting herself in harm's way to free other people. And like, God, people are capable of things. They are capable of things. I don't know the full extent of human nature. I don't know what all people are capable of. Anyway, that's my assessment for what it's worth. And I think it's part of the project behind this book. It's like, if we can see how differently those people thought, then it opens us to the possibility that maybe there's a lot of other ways to be human. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, it's other people that let me know that there can be dancing and singing, because I would never have discovered these things. Anyway, I wanted to, this isn't a history class, but is it Goulnose? I wanted to talk a little bit about, I think the answer to some of your questions is, what did Hitler learn in the First World War, in which he was a soldier. And it seems to me the big lesson there is the German army collapsed because it had no food, not because it had no guns or ammunition or anything like that, but it had no food, and the population had no food. And so I think Hitler was obsessed with this concept, one we find in the Greeks. Very good. Autarky, self-sufficiency, the precondition for all self-rule. And Hitler, for all his bent, wanted a Germany that could rule itself and be free from the pressures that, say, like the British Navy could seal its ports or whatever, the stresses, because he wanted really then, I think, to undo the consequences of World War I. And to do that, he needed resources. Now, I think it was unlucky. Like most people, he only wanted what was his and what's next to his. And what happened to be next to his? Well, all these Slavs out there in, and so I don't read so much social history, but I do read military history. And they sure knew that the Ukraine produced food and the Caspian Basin produced oil. And if you, from the military side that I've looked at, a pretty rational calculation about what resources were there and what those resources would do for Germany, and that they wouldn't do anything for Germany if they conquered that territory and then let the people that lived there eat the food and use the oil. So it was rational Verstand. The people had to go. Now, this isn't that remarkable because the Communist Party in Russia had done the same calculations. They were trying just as hard, or trying harder in the 30s to depopulate and resettle these areas with ethnic Russians, and that was fine. That was fine. I mean, Germany said, yeah, it's just the wrong people conquering and resettling. We want that area too, because we need those resources, because we want to be self-sufficient so we can be self-ruling. So I don't, most of this I got from a book by one of the best English language historians of Eastern Europe is Tim Snyder. Sharon talks about him. He's the one who wrote On Tyranny, the little book, and different things, but he wrote Bloodlands. And that's a book about the history of the area between Russia and Germany from, say, from the 30s to the end of the war, or to actually after the war, because there were tremendous population changes after that. And I happen to say one thing about Hannah, I'll talk about Hannah Arendt, is I grew up as a young philosophy student. She was quite influential. It's hard to find better books than The Origins of Totalitarianism, The Human Condition, The Life of the Mind, Between Past and Future, her current essays. Those are just, and then the 90s or something. But she died. There was a real effort on the left, I think, because I read about it mostly in the New York Review of Books. It seemed just essay after essay. Heidegger was a Nazi. You know, I think that's somewhat similar to saying Hegel was a Napoleonic supporter, because when Hitler went through Jena, he says, you know, there goes the spirit of the age, or whatever quote is attributed to him. I mean,
Well, that was
Heidegger's
Napoleon going through Jena.
Yeah, Napoleon. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, that's what I said. Hegel was he a big supporter of Napoleon, because he acknowledged that historically Napoleon was a world figure, and I think Heidegger at least saw that Hitler was going to reshape the modern world.
Much to the chagrin of Schopenhauer.
Yeah, well, the other, where was I going, Stephen? Tell me.
You're talking about the Napoleon was walking past.
Well, I mean, the undoing of Hannah Arendt. It started with Heidegger recognizing Nazism as the world historical force that it was. That it was, if being was manifest in the 30s, this has got to be being becoming real. And then, he had a student, Hannah Arendt. Oh, they had sex. Oh, by double association, you know, it's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Hannah Arendt must be a secret Nazi, you know, and all of this written by people that probably couldn't lift the origins of totalitarianism, yet alone read it. And so I'm not qualified, but I would defend her as being a source of tremendous insight into modernity. You know,
she's rattling people's certainties. You don't keep forgive them for that.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, we like to talk about communism versus fascism, you know, and she says, oh, wait a minute, these are 2 twigs on the tree of totalitarianism. These guys have exactly the same principles of government. You know, that is that there's one guy that's got all the say, you know, and everybody else doesn't count for anything. Anyway, that's enough. So I'm hoping, good knows, take a look at Hannah Arendt again, but don't read what the modern journalists have written about her. All her books are in print. Go read them. In fact, they're in used bookstores because people don't read them.
She's out of fashion.
Yeah, she's out of fashion.
Yeah.
That's right. And Snyder is very good. I mean, yes, most Western military history of World War II and the 30s acts like everything happened in the West. But Snyder, he spoke German, Polish, spoke Polish, reads Russian, works on his Ukrainian stuff. He's got lectures on YouTube, got whatever, where he really understands, for a Western historian, the best. I guess there are, I don't know any Eastern historians, so, you know, you might. So I would trust them, but there is at least some recognition of why this happened. And it was a true tragedy. I mean, you had Russia wanted these resources because it's too cold up where Moscow is, where the Russian state, Muscovy is. and Germany didn't have the farmland and had coal but no oil. And they both wanted this and knew what it meant, made rational calculations to go get it. And they tried. They sent big armies to fight each other. And they both knew that the area had to be depopulated if those resources were to serve their needs well enough.
Thank you, Donald. Yeah, it's interesting. I reposted the links to Timothy Snyder and Bloodlands for Gulnaz. That's what Donald was talking about. And when he dropped off, it was right when he was giving his recommendation is to kind of see what Hitler thought he was doing. Donald would say Timothy Snyder is one of the best historians to talk about that, and he does in Bloodlands, which there's a link to the Wikipedia article there. And that concept of, I know we're out of time, so we're gonna have to wrap up soon, but that concept of autarkia, as Donald points out, the Nazi desire to take over the Ukraine and the Caspian Basin in order to get access to the farmlands and the oil is a rational, i.e. Verstand decision, motivated by what would on the surface seem to be an ancient ethos, autarkia, self-rule, that every organism needs the ability to take care of itself. And if it can't take care of itself, it dies. And that's how you know how long it lives. It lives right up until it can't take care of itself anymore. You have to be able to manage your blood pressure, your blood sugar, and all those things. And so the Nazis thought that by conquering, Ukraine and Caspian Basin, they would make themselves self-sufficient. That Germany as a land didn't have enough farmland and didn't have any petroleum to speak of.
And they were right.
And they're right, but the problem is autarkia is not the only or highest Greek virtue. It is a sub-virtue of sophrosune. And sophrosune includes the recognition that not only do you have to be healthy as an individual, the group that you compose, the larger group, also has to be healthy. So if you make yourself healthy at the expense of the larger group, you're cancer. You're not a healthy organism, you're a cancer. That's the definition of a cancer. And likewise, if you make the larger group healthy at the expense of the individual, then you have totalitarianism where you don't want, sure, the group is, it exists and it's powerful, but nobody wants to be part of it because it's so awful inside. And so the trick to sophrosune is recognizing that you don't have a winning combination until your strategy allows both you as an individual and you and your neighbors together as a larger group to thrive. It can't just be one or the other. If either version of just one and not the other is some form of dystopia. And,
the Spanish had an empire, the French had an empire, the Anglo-Saxons had an empire. Poor little Germany was just trying to do the same.
Poor little Germany, just trying to do what all of his neighbors were doing. So Ari, you get the last bit for today. So come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Oh, this is amazing. I wasn't sure if I was going to speak since we're already like 7 minutes over. I'll try to be brief. First, I'm going to say there's a great term, I think, for what Donald's saying is this autocracy desire is called Lebensraum, that it's called living space, and Germany wanted living space. And again, it makes a lot of sense if you're just a subject among the objects, right? And again, he doesn't call himself a historian, but I definitely call him a historian. Dan Carlin has a whole set of audio pieces, and the one on the First World War is called a blueprint for oh, come on, where you blow up the whole world. Anyways, it's my brain is. But then the second one, he has a whole series on called the Ostfront, the East Front of Germany, and he basically makes a really good argument that in terms of numbers of deaths and numbers of important battles and all this, essentially Stalingrad, that Germany was really not won and lost in the West. When the United States started to come, they already lost the war of what they've been doing with Russia, and essentially again this idea that they were both pushing Germany later, but Russia earlier for the oil in the Balkans through fighting at Stalingrad. And at Stalingrad, he talks about there's essentially these plains on the Ostfront near, I don't remember exactly, in Turkey or somewhere around there, on the way to Stalingrad, that there's a desert, it looks like, of white powder And if you go there, it's actually millions and millions and millions of little pieces of bone that scatter the whole thing. And this is the remains from all the death at Stalingrad. And he had to go and see these bone fields. But my original point that I wanted to say, that I think I keep it pretty brief, is this idea of marrying the idea that we talked about between cosmos and chaos, and the misassociation between that just order and chaos, or order and yeah, order and randomness or freedom. And the idea is that when you have the banality of evil here is this misunderstanding, I think, that the banality of evil is essentially someone who just wants to put food on their table, just wants to go to work, just wants to live their life, just wants to harvest some food. They want something very ordinary. This is what I call the intentions pave the road to hell. That you can have a whole bunch of order, that I just want to put food on my table, that I just want to sell some meat or whatever it is, and that these order coming together with each other create a chaos. The wrong types of order that interact is not cosmos just because it's order, right? And this is the banality of evil, that you can have a whole bunch of order that on its own creates a lower dimensional system where it's just like they want to have food, they want to live life, they don't want to do anything, they just want to have bureaucracy, they just want to have something very basic that unto itself is really quite harmless. But when you stack these things together in a system, then it gets out of control and it really creates a lot of evil. And so this looks on the small scale of bureaucracy, or I just want to go to work, or I just want something simple like I want a promotion, right? This just sounds like ordinary stuff. It's not harmful. It's not harmful. It's very commonplace, and it's not evil at all. But when you put these types of orders in position with each other, I would almost argue it's perhaps you could make an argument for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein's monster here. Don't just put an arm and a leg together and a body. It's just, this is how you make a human, right? You're like, no, this creates a monster. This creates a chaos. Don't confuse chaos with cosmos. And the idea is the sum of these things isn't just their equals. It's not just their parts. It's the sum of these parts makes something greater than itself. In this case, the thing that made greater was something evil. And you have to be very careful that when you put things together, that essentially the antithesis and the synthesis through, an hypothesis isn't just this, like you said, a machine that just automatically put things together and out pops synthesis. No, you'd be very careful that how these things interact, what they're going to do. And I think this is also just to humanize this on a very compassionate level, is human beings can't see themselves. They think they can. This is, I think, I forget the guy who created this, but the idea of the fatal conceit, that I think I know better than my ancestors, that just, I can create a new system. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be perfect. It's a lot of what Stephen says. You have this great idea, but ideas, or you also say abstracts are always to err, right? This is just not be able to see long-term consequences, the law of unintended consequences. And so essentially, you're putting all these pieces together of banality, and all of a sudden they pop out the emergence of evil, right? Because you just don't know what you're doing. You got a Frankenstein's monster, and you thought you were making life, right? So this is where the ordinary, and I think it's so strange that you see it all over the place, this idea of cosmos and chaos. It's a very popular idea that chaos is just randomness and a lack of order. You're like, and cosmos is order. Like, no, chaos is a bunch of order all interacting with each other in the wrong way. So that's a nice place to stop. So I was thinking that banality of evil can really be related to what we were talking about with cosmos and chaos, that cosmos brings life and creates a living system that's healthy and balanced, and chaos is just like decay and death, and yeah, like that.
We're looking for converts to Ariak down at the temple. I think you look like good material.
Sounds good.
Well, I'm a fan of young Frankenstein more than.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Frau Blucher.
Now we got a cosmos. Now we got a cosmos and young Frankenstein. Absolutely.
That's right.
Abby Normal. Abby Normal.
and that enormous Schwanstucker.
Oh, thank you.
I better say for Ari's information, Ariak's the god of chaos in the Michael Moorcock novels.
Right.
What is this book? What do you think? What you
Stormbringer, Michael
The Elric
Moorcock.
series.
Oh.
Elric of Melniboné. He was a follower of the gods of chaos, and then he switched sides.
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
I think we need it. Temple to chaos today in every town. Could all
At least we'd be
down there
genuine.
worshipping the gods
At
of
least we'd be
chaos.
authentic, right?
Acknowledging the reality. Well, I had a great time. I hope you all did too. And
Take care, everybody.
I will see all of you except for Donald next Monday.
Nice.
Perhaps.
You know where Donald's going to be?
He's with the source himself, right?
Yeah, he's going to be visiting Kenneth.
Yeah. The Oracle of Austin.
Any chance you can get Kenneth to come on with you? That'd be fantastic.
One of these days.
I would really like to get him to go to lunch with me. I don't know. We have no agenda. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
You don't need an agenda. Put the two of you in a room together and conversation will just follow.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be me listening and him talking.
And a landslide of books. Oh, Donald, you need this one. Oh, and this one.
Oh,
I set these 80 aside for you.
You know, I got talking some text from Angela where she said, I was welcome, Diane and I were welcome to stay with them, but that their house is subject to sudden crapalanches. That they have
books and papers.
They have books and papers just come sliding down. And so you have to be...
That's a good way to go. It's a good way to go.
My wife...
Buried in an avalanche.
That's right.
Crapalanche.
All right. Have a great visit, Donald, and the rest of you I'll see you on Monday.
Yeah,
Take care. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.